Look, things may look bad right now. There's always something going on in the world. There's always something going on in your country. There have been challenges and bad things that have happened all through history. Bad things always happen, but that we have overcome those. Tells me that no matter how bad things get, they can always be better.
Let me ask you something. When the world feels chaotic, when everything from war to politics to news makes the future feel uncertain, how do you stay hopeful? And how do you stay strong? And how do you remind yourself that one person, yes, I'm talking about you, can make a difference, even if just in the lives of your loved ones? That is exactly what today's conversation is about. Our guest is Alan Gratz, the best-selling author who's spent years researching and writing about humanity's darkest moments and chapters. But here's the fascinating thing. Alan's books do not leave readers feeling scared. They leave you feeling hopeful. Because the truth is, again and again, history shows that humans have incredible resilience, kindness, and courage. And today's episode is all about what this truly means for you. You're walking away with 3 powerful takeaways. How to stay hopeful even when the world feels uncertain, what history can teach us about resilience and why we're actually so much stronger than we think, and how and why every single person, including you, has the power to shape the future. So if you've ever looked around at your social media or at your TV screen or just at your news feed and wondered, is there still anything to be hopeful about? There is. And this conversation is for you. So let's dive in.
Welcome to Hack Your Happiness.
Did you know that many of you who listen to the show haven't subscribed yet? So could we ask you a little favor? If our podcast brings you a small bit of happiness and you love the message and what you can learn, the easiest and free thing that you can do is just hit the subscribe button. And our commitment to you is that we're going to keep bringing you the best guests that we can get and bring more happiness insights and ways that you can make your life a little bit happier.
Anastasia and I grew up reading your books, and we love history, we love reading, and that's why we're so excited to have you on today. So just to jump right into it, you've written so many incredible books, but you weren't always an author. You were originally a teacher, which I didn't know before getting prepared for this episode. So what made you change your career from a teacher to an author?
Well, I always wanted to be an author since I was a kid. Like growing up, I knew I wanted to be a writer and I wanted to tell stories. And I worked on it all through middle school and high school and college. I went to school to study creative writing. But when I graduated, I had to get a job. Like I had to do something that was going to make me some money to live on. So I did a few different jobs. I bounced around from this to that. And I finally came back around to teaching. Both of my parents were teachers, and I enjoyed teaching, and so I was like, you know what? I want to get into teaching. So I went back to school, got a master's degree in education, and then I started teaching middle school English, all at the same time that I was writing stuff and sending it out. So every summer I would write books, and I would send them out, and I was getting rejection letters, and I hadn't sold anything. And then in 2002, something big happened for me and my family. My daughter Josephine was born. And my wife and I had to decide if one of us was going to stay home and take care of her or if we were going to have to ship her off to daycare because we both had day jobs. And my wife, in words that will live in infamy in our household, said, "Alan, you've wanted to be a writer since you were a kid. You've been working on it in your evenings and your weekends and your summers home. Why don't you quit your job, stay home, be a stay-at-home dad, and try to get your first book sold?" So I did. I quit teaching and I stayed home. I was more of a dad at first than I was anything else, because when you got a baby, that's kind of your full-time job. But when my daughter was sleeping or when I could hand her off to my wife at a few times, I would run into my office and I would work on writing books. And the very first book I wrote while I was a stay-at-home dad was Samurai Shortstop. And that became the very first book that I sold and had published. So I had always figured that if I hadn't sold a book or established myself as a writer by the time my daughter went to school, that I would also go back to school, but as a teacher. So luckily, by the time she went to school, I was established enough to stay home and really make a go of it. Probably still wasn't making enough then to justify me being home without being the daycare as well. But I had gotten enough of a start that it was worth a shot.
Oh, that's such a wonderful story. And I love that your wife was such a big advocate for you to truly like go all in on your passion. Because I think, so many times we talk a lot on our podcast about following your passion and do what you love. But sometimes we are our own biggest critics, and we're like, you know what, I'm not a good enough writer, or I'm not a good enough athlete, or I'll never be able to make it, in quotations. Right. So we need someone who can, see our potential beyond ourselves. And so I love that your wife was able to do that.
It really helps to have that support system. You really need somebody who's in your corner. And if you've got somebody in your life who's not, it's maybe a good indicator that maybe they shouldn't be in your life.
Totally.
Absolutely. That outside support is really important. Mm-hmm. And what I love so much about your books is that they really emphasize how anyone can make an impact. So what inspired this unique take in a series, and why is it important for everyone to be able to feel like they can make an impact?
Yeah, I think that young people especially often feel helpless. I mean, they live in a world that is run by adults. And adults seem to have all the power in the world, and they do have a lot of power. But kids need to remember that they have voices too. And I mean, just look at Greta Thunberg, who started protesting climate change by just sitting outside her government building on Fridays with a sign that said, like we got to take care of climate change. And all these politicians would pass her by every day and see her. And slowly more people began to join her and sit with her until it became a movement, right? Until she was speaking in front of the UN and seeing policy change in her own country. So I always want to remind kids that they do have a voice, that I know that they live in a world that is largely outside of their control, but adults do listen when they speak up and when they make a stink. and the other thing is that I often feel this way as an adult, but I know that I felt this way as a kid. It can feel overwhelming when you see a whole lot of problems and you feel like you have to fix everything. And one of the things I worry about me writing books like I do is that kids will read them and think, oh my gosh, here's 20 different problems and I've got to handle every one of these. I got to deal with all of this. And what I tried to say in 2 Degrees and what I keep repeating when I see kids and speak to them is that no one person can do everything. But if everybody does something, then we will make progress. That's when change happens. And so I think that's really kind of what I'm trying to tell kids they can do. They can have an impact, but also don't worry, you don't have to solve all of the world's problems yourself. That together we can all solve them.
That's beautiful because, even just scrolling online on social media, it can be so overwhelming with all the different, negative things that are constantly, changing and happening. And I think you're right, Alan, in that sense of like, one can feel like if I, am here and I'm a bystander, like I should be doing something to help, but how can I do something when there's so many issues? And I think sometimes that can even make us at any age not even want to do anything at all because we feel
totally
like overwhelmed, like you were saying. Exactly.
Yeah. And sometimes you got to pick your battles. And I work with a group called Authors Against Book Bans right now. And look, there's a whole lot of problems in the world and a lot of things that I donate to and that I show up, for protest to or activism, but I devote most of my time to this one cause because it is very personal to me and also needs to be fixed. And we can't ignore the little stuff just to attack the big stuff, and we can't also do everything at once. So you kind of have to pick the thing that resonates the most with you and that you have the best ability to impact, the best ability to make a change and go for it.
Totally.
Absolutely. Kind of find what you're most passionate about. And you don't have to do something just because you find that everyone else around you
And I like what you said, though, about where you can actually make the most impact, because maybe you are the most passionate about something in politics or something in the climate or healthcare, for instance, but with where you are right now and your knowledge and your network, you can't actually impact that, but maybe there's something else you can do or steps you can take to get into those fields. So I really like that, not just what you're the most passionate about, but also where you can actually really have a mark.
Yeah, when I was writing Refugee, I was reading about how refugees were coming to the island of Lesbos in Greece and needed help. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go there right now. I'm going to go to Greece and I'm going to help people out of rafts. and I'm going to help them get on their feet and find new lives. And I was talking to somebody about this and they're like, do you speak Arabic? I was like, no. They're like, do you speak Greek? I was like, no. They're like, maybe you'd be more in the way there than you would be helpful. So like you can want to do all the things, but you have to find the things that where the places where you fit, the places where you can make a change.
100%. And your books are incredible. They're very historical, and they bring this unique youth perspective into many scary moments throughout history, from things like World War II and 9/11 to refugee crises. So for anyone listening, for the person listening, what do you think is the most important thing for them to take away from your books and from the history that you cover?
I was thinking about this, and I think there's a woman named Eglantine Jebb, and she was the founder of a group called Save the Children. And it's a group that I have raised money for along with UNICEF and have talked a lot about because of their work with refugee children in particular. And she had this famous quote. This was, I guess, back in the 1800s. It was a long time ago. But she said famously that every war is a war against children. And she didn't mean that, like, of course, that we're waging war against kids. What she meant was that every time there's a war, kids are caught up in the middle. And they didn't start the war, and they're not the reason for the war. They're usually not the ones fighting the war. Sometimes, unfortunately, they are, but usually they're not. But they are caught in the middle just like everybody else. And she wanted to remind people that we have to watch out for the kids. And so I write the books that I do in sort of the same way. We read history books about big events and times and places and world-changing events. And we read about the adults who were there and the things that they did. But we often forget about the kids who were also there. And they were often right in the middle of everything. And so I want to use my books as a way of saying the kids are there too. And this is what they were doing. This is how they were affected. I want to show the impact of history on young people and just remind my readers they were there too. And that even though they were fairly powerless in those situations, just like we talked about before, they still affected change.
Absolutely. I think that's definitely a really great reminder that oftentimes, like, you don't read about in those textbooks when you're focusing on, like, you know, the key, like, senators and big political people, that it's really easy to focus all your energy on. But I absolutely think that's so important, and you're definitely bringing up a really overlooked perspective.
And most importantly, I think that applies to anyone, that feeling of helplessness, that feeling of insecurity, of like, there's people, you know, in the government or in, you know, my school, my family, who are making decisions that affect me, but I feel like powerless over them. And I think that can apply to kids, teens, adults. We can all feel powerless sometimes, but still so affected. And I love that your books show, you know what, you actually can take even small steps to find hope and build resilience and make an impact. And I think that's honestly one of my favorite parts of your books, because it shows that, like, you're not powerless unless you, like, really, in many situations, put yourself in that situation. There's things that you can do and people you can connect with. And I really love that.
Cool, thanks.
And why do you think that, you know, history in general is such an important subject for people to talk and learn about?
You know, there's another famous line that says, those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. And I really believe that. I think it's important to look back at things that happened in the past and make sure that if we made mistakes, that we don't make those same mistakes again. But it also works the other way around, and we often forget to look back at history and look for the things we did right, and to make sure that we also do those. And we haven't always done the wrong thing as human beings. Like I always point to D-Day, for example, when multiple countries in the world got together to invade, like the beaches at Normandy, to try and get a foothold back into France, and to really start to push the Nazis back to Germany. And it was that huge collective international effort that did it. One country alone couldn't have done it. And it took all of those different countries working together. The only time since then that we've had that many countries involved in a project that was like a progressive one, that's something that did good work, was the International Space Station. And like, think about what we could do if everybody in the world said, you know what, we're going to tackle cancer. or we're going to eradicate tuberculosis, or, we're going to try and get rid of poverty, or raise families up so that they're making a base minimum amount of money, or tackle climate change, like all these huge problems that are facing the world at large. Think of what we could do if everybody threw in together. And so I think it's really important to look back at the past and say, whoops, we made a mistake there. Let's not do that again. And also to look at the things that we did right and say, like, look at how successful that was. Maybe we could do that again, right?
Absolutely. I think that is a really interesting perspective, and kind of to flip that kind of view on it. I know a lot of people think that history can be very negative and just learning about from our mistakes. And speaking of that, what is the biggest lesson that you think we should all know for our own well-being and hope from history?
I think for me personally, the biggest lesson of history is that, look, things may look bad right now. There's always something going on in the world. There's always something going on in your country, in your neighborhood, in your community. And there have been challenges and bad things that have happened all through history. And I think it's realizing that bad things always happen, but that we have overcome those, that we have been able to, as a human race, to overcome those moments of loss and oppression and failure. And to me, that's really encouraging. We look back and we see all the bad things that happened in the past, but it says, like, we made it. We survived this long, and we seem to keep doing better. It tells me that no matter how bad things get, now they can always be better, because they always have. I'll pull out another quote. Martin Luther King Jr. said that the arc of history bends toward justice, and I believe that. I really believe that we are moving always toward a more just and equal and better society. But I think that we always also have to remember that we have to bend it. Like, we can't wait for it to happen. We have to be the ones to do it. And sometimes it's very easy to kind of sit back and say, like, all right, we beat that, we fixed that. And then if we sit back and we don't stay vigilant, things can move back to the way they were. So I do think that looking back there, it's a way of saying we can overcome all of these challenges, but it's also a way of reminding ourselves that we can't rest on our laurels. We got to keep working for it. We have to keep earning that better future for ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, there's been so many horrible things that have happened in history, as your books, shed the stories of just a few, but it really is incredible how we've been able to turn some of these terrible disasters into moments like that we can actually come together and find justice and improve life in many different ways. And I think that's a beautiful way to look at it, because sometimes, you're sitting in history class or you're listening to a history book or podcast and it just seems so sad and daunting, like, oh no, is this human nature? But realizing that, there's a good flip side that we can learn from, and that's what we should really focus on our energy towards, is like, how can we actually push our generation
and
forward,
kind of reframing that and realizing that you don't have to only focus on how history and that there will always be bad things and there's nothing you can do about that, but instead, if you're focusing on being empowered and saying, like, I can make an impact and push our current history into a more positive
make that
direction.
bend. I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, like we've been talking about, these negative historical events, these really disastrous, devastating historical events, can have these shreds of hope and resilience and light in them. And I think that's fascinating, kind of different. I'm not quite sure what the word would be for it, but I think it's a fascinating relationship. And I'm curious, for people right now who are going through a tough time, whether it's, just navigating post-pandemic life and climate change, or maybe it's a personal situation or a family situation, what is your advice, Alan, for finding hope amongst challenge and uncertainty?
I think, we often look back at the past and we give people a pass for doing the wrong thing. We say, like, oh, they were a product of their time, right? Oh, well, they had slaves because everybody had slaves. And you know what? I think it's time to stop giving everybody in the past that pass. when you look back at slavery, there were abolitionists as far back as there were slaves. There were people who were fighting for that to be undone as soon as it began, right? You look back at Nazi Germany and we think, oh, all the German people just totally accepted it and went along with it. And not all the people did. There were people who joined a resistance. It was very small and it was not hugely effective at the beginning, but there were people who were fighting back, right? There's always somebody out there who is fighting the bad stuff. And sometimes they are the real, very small minority. And sometimes they aren't making progress very fast, but eventually they do. They gather, like Greta Thunberg, they gather people around them. They get stronger until they are actually making change. So I guess for me, knowing that there always are people who are out there fighting the good fight, always, no matter how big a hill they have to climb, that's really inspiring to me. Mr. Rogers from, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood used to say, look for the helpers when he was talking to kids. Look for the helpers. And I love that advice. Like what that assumes is there always are people out there who are helping. There always are people. You just have to find them, right? If you're in trouble, if you need help, there are always people out there. You just got to find them. I remember there was a book I read when I was, I guess, in college. I was studying young adult literature, and there's a book called The Chocolate War by Robert Cormier. I don't know if you guys have read this book or run into it. It used to be a big YA book that a lot of people would read, but now a lot of people don't because there's just tons of great YA books. So anyway, I read this one for class, and basically there's this kid who just goes through bad thing after bad thing after bad thing, and at the end, like it just ends and there's no hope. Like it's just all bad. And there's nobody, no teacher, no friend, nobody along the way who's there to help him. He's totally on an island by himself, not literally, but I mean like in high school, he just feels like there's nobody he can reach out to because in the book, there's nobody who's like, we don't see that person. It's not like they're there and he just didn't reach out to them, right? In the book, there's nobody. And I remember when I got done with that book, I just like threw it across the room. I usually do not abuse my books like this, but I hurled it across the room because I just refuse to believe that there is a world in which there is zero hope. I just can't believe it. I don't accept the premise. It may be very hard to find the people, the helpers. It may be very hard to find people who who can help you, but they're there. They're somewhere. And so I really believe that those people are out there. I try to be that person myself, and I think that if we all try to be that person when we can't help everybody, but if we can be there when somebody needs us, that's all we can ask. So there are always people trying to help each other, to work together and to fight for what's right. I think that's the biggest thing about looking to the past and taking hope from it for me.
What you've said about, hope and this too shall pass is a mindset that I think a lot of people could really benefit from. And I know your books have really helped me build a foundation of hopefulness into my everyday life. And if something in this conversation has given you some clarity of mind or given you something to feel more hopeful about in life, send this conversation to someone in your life, because so many of us can get stuck in our own tracks and start feeling like there's nothing good in the world. And whether it's a personal situation or a big situation of something going on in the world today, just know that there is something good coming. And think of one person that you can send this episode link to brighten their day and their daily life even just a little bit.
I love that. And I really think that being a helper too is so important, and realizing that you can be there for other people as well and bring them a little bit of hope and maybe a little bit of happiness.
I mean,
sometimes it's just moral support, sometimes it's just being an empathetic ear.
Yeah, it really is. And I think, that notion of you're not actually alone. All throughout history, there's been people who are fighting for the other side, even if it's a small, tiny group of people.
Yep.
And so really, if you feel like maybe you're alone, you don't have any friends, or maybe you're struggling to make a decision in your life, or you just are really frustrated by a circumstance in your life or in your job or whatever it is, look for those people rather than just being stuck and distraught, because when we're alone, everything just kind of weighs on us. But when we seek support and we like have a community that aligns with us, however small, even if it's just one other person, it's so powerful. And so that's kind of like taking back that power, right? It's like you can find the hope for yourself. It's not just going to land in your lap. You can go out and seek it actively, which is so inspiring. Yeah. Love that.
Absolutely.
And, I think sometimes people view hope as this kind of fuzzy thing. Like, what exactly is hope? Like, oh, yes, you can find hope in your darkest moments, but what does that mean, really? And so, what does hope mean to you, Alan?
To me, I think hope is difficult, right? Because like you're saying, it's this abstract concept, but I think that it's always believing that there's a better future. It's always believing that things can be better, that they will be better if we work hard for it. So again, there's darkness and challenge in every era, and there's always people fighting back, and we have to be those people, as I said. But and as tiring as it is, as discouraging as it is sometimes, and as much as I'd like to stick my head in the sand sometimes and just ignore everything that's going on for my own sanity, it's really important for us to keep standing up for what's right. And I think as long as, and it's hope that makes us do that. It's hope that says, I'm gonna get out there and beat this drum for this cause one more time, even though there's a lot of people stacked against me, even though there's a lot of challenges in front of me. But we wake up in the morning and we go back and we get in that fight again, because we hope that there will be a better tomorrow. And I think that's the thing that has to sustain us. Hope is such a tricky thing because it can be the cause of a lot of suffering. If when you expect something good and you don't get it, you can be very disappointed. And so hoping for a better world can be painful when it doesn't come along right away. But I think we have to play the long game with hope. I think that we have to keep looking forward to the future and saying everything we're doing now, I hope and I believe will pay off in the future.
Absolutely. And I find that I heard this analogy like a long time ago. I don't really remember where from, but that hope is oftentimes viewed as this like little like thin thing that's like, very fragile and frail, when in reality it's very tough and you have to really like hold on to it. It's not this little kind of like piece of glass or very dainty ornament or something that you're trying to just use to, it's very beat up, but it just continues to keep going.
And what do you guys remember? I should have looked this up. The story of Pandora's box. Like when Pandora's box opens, all the things come out in the world, but it's closed, and the last thing that's kept inside is hope. Like I think if I'm remembering that correctly, that's like the story, and like the one thing that didn't escape was hope. And I think that's fascinating. It's like that's the one thing that we still have innate in all of us, and that's hope, that we that we still get to keep inside us. I need to look up that story. It's been a while since I read the Pandora's box story.
I love that. I've heard of Pandora's box, but I don't remember it precisely.
Yeah,
but
you have to look it up.
Yeah, what's interesting about hope, though, to me is just like you said, nobody can take that from you, like no matter what happens, no matter who you're surrounded by in your life or what happens, if you choose, it's your choice entirely whether you have hope or not. And like you said, like it's something that we don't always have control over what's going to happen. That's why it's important to look in the long game. But at the same time, going out and seeking the supporters, or going out and looking for things that are happening that make you feel better and that continue to perpetuate and grow your hope, I think is just a way to continue that feeling of positivity towards the future, because you are the one who gets to kind of maintain it and safeguard it.
That's right. It's yours. You're the only person who can give it up. You're right.
And you must do a lot of research for these books and all about the different people and the time periods. How long does it take to research and write a book?
You know, for me, the research and writing on it is it's a long process. So I usually start with an idea, and I'll know, like, I want to write about D-Day, or I want to write about Pearl Harbor, or I want to write about climate change, and then I'll kind of write down everything I know about it. Then I'll go online and look for more stuff that I didn't know about it, but I can't stop there. That's where I kind of make my list of things that I want to go to the library and research. Then I go to the library, I check out a ton of books, and then I come back to my office and I read them and I take notes. And that whole process of research usually takes me, like, I don't know, maybe like 8 or 9 months. Like, it's a long process. Now I actually have somebody who is a graduate of the University of Tennessee, where I went to school, who is a library science student, and she helps me out. I tell her a topic, and she'll go and do a lot of preliminary research for me and put it into Google Drive, and then I go through and read it all. And I still have to read every bit of it, but it helps me find it and collect it, and that saves me a lot of time. But I read through all that research looking for my story. When I'm reading through all those notes, I have another screen open on my computer, and I'm typing up like scenes from my Pearl Harbor book. And I might read about, oh my gosh, the bomb fell on the USS Arizona, and it blew up like a volcano and it burned for days. I got to show that. Or there was a ship that turned over and people were trapped inside it. I want to show that. And so I'll write down all these scene ideas. And when I feel like I have enough scenes to make a story, I stop doing the research. And this is the really important part of knowing when to stop. And then I start writing down all the scenes that I think might go in the book, and put them up on a big board in my office and make an outline. And some of the stuff doesn't fit, I have to throw it out. And some of the stuff, I have holes in the story and have to go back and do some more research. But basically, that's kind of like how I do it. I'm reading all this research, I'm looking for the story. And then once I have my outline built, I take all that back down, type it up on my computer, and then move all my research notes over into the chapters where I'll need it. So, like, if I write a chapter about the USS Arizona, I move all of my Arizona notes into that chapter in my outline, or so that when I get to that chapter, I'm not sifting through a huge binder of notes or pages and pages of notes. Like, I know exactly where those notes are. They're like, here's what's happened, here's what happens in the chapter, and here beneath that are all the notes I need to tell just that part of the story. So I think that the idea to research, to outline part of it, is about 8 to 9 months. And then the next part of it for me is like a year's worth of writing and rewriting and rewriting. So in general, it's about a year and 9 months for a book. And the first 9 months of that is all the research part, which I love, but it's so easy to just keep reading, because if you like what you're writing about, if what you're studying, if you're really interested, you could just read about it forever. But there's a certain point where I have to say, like, I'm not trying to become a professor who could write a thesis on Pearl Harbor. I just need to learn enough to write this one book, and then I got to move on. And so for a person who likes to learn a lot of stuff, which I do, it's fun to be able to read about this, to dive into it, and then be done and start a whole new project again and learn something else that's new.
I love that. I think that, like, knowing when to stop is so important, and I feel like that can be a really hard thing for everyone to learn. Because, you have to kind of know your boundaries, and I think that kind of figuring out, I think you have definitely a great thing going. You kind of have it figured out.
Got a good process in place now.
But absolutely, just kind of learning.
I've done it a few times now.
Yes,
exactly. You need experience just to try it and know yourself.
Yeah. And I'm curious, from all this research, all the stories you've read, I know this might be kind of a impossible question, but what's one of the most shocking or touching, compelling stories that you've come across?
Writing Ground Zero was my hardest book, the one about 9/11. And it was really difficult because I was alive when that happened. I was not in New York or Pennsylvania or at the Pentagon, any place where that was directly affected by it. I was teaching in Tennessee. I was an 8th grade English teacher, and I remember watching it happen on television and being as kind of destroyed by it as a lot of other adults were who were watching it unfold on television, and frightened and confused. And I remember back then I watched, of course, all the TV about it and read some articles about it, but there was a certain point where I stopped reading about it like in detail because I just didn't want to get into the real horror of it. And when I wrote Ground Zero, I had to go back and do that reading. Like I had to read the 911 transcripts from the people who were trapped in the building and were calling out because the phone lines still worked even though they couldn't get out. I had to read about the people who were trapped in elevators and trapped where the jet fuel was coming down through the building and on fire, and the people who were a part of that mad crush to get down the stairs and get out. And I think one of the most interesting things for me was reading about the way that people helped each other out. And this gets back to what we were talking about before, looking for the helpers. But in this case, everybody was helping each other. I mean, everybody was caught up in the same horrible situation in the Twin Towers. And like people carried wheelchair-bound people down the stairs because the elevators weren't working and they couldn't make it down the stairs in their wheelchairs. There was a blind man in the Twin Towers whose friends helped him make it all the way out safely that day. There were people who were trapped in elevators and worked together to get out, something that I show in my book to show how that happened. People helped complete strangers, even though they themselves were in incredible danger, because they were in it together. And I've always been stunned by that, in a good way. Like I'm so impressed by the way that the people in the Twin Towers and the people in New York City in general handled that day. You know, New York is a tough place. I've been there. It's a great place. But, if you don't order fast enough when you're standing at the deli, they yell at you. You know, like it's the kind of place where they don't mess around. But that day, everybody put all of that aside, and you really saw the heart of New Yorkers that day, and the way that they really do care for their fellow citizens. And I was stunned to go into that all over again and see that I'd seen it that day, and we had talked a lot about it in the days and weeks and months after 9/11 happened. But to go back and to read all that and to see how people had helped each other, I was stunned all over again. I was really moved. That was the hardest book to write because of all the bad things that happened to the people in that situation. But I think it's my best book.
That's a beautiful, beautiful story. And I love, that your book and you just now like highlight the absolute beauty of the people and human nature and like survival instinct in that situation. Because so often we think about 9/11 and any other catastrophic event like that, and we think about all the bad things that happen. But also I think there's a beautiful message there of like people innately do care about each other and they want to help each other and they want to help people who are blind or in a wheelchair before they help themselves. And that's such a beautiful message just to carry in your heart and like know that people out there care, even if they seem a little cold on the outside sometimes. They actually do care.
When push comes to shove, I think that's when you see who people really are. And I think that's when we saw who the people of New York really were.
I love it.
Absolutely.
I 100% love it.
And
so
like
much.
we've all talked about here, all of your incredible stories really focus on youth who are under so much pressure and with a survival element too. And what have you learned about your own resilience through your research and writing books? And how can we all be more resilient in our own lives, even when we're not facing horrible pressure like many of your characters do?
Right. Hopefully none of us ever has to go through anything like what I write about. I haven't, and I've been really lucky in that way. But it has had a big impact on me because I think what I'm trying to say and what I've learned through researching all this is you can survive way more than you think you can. If you think studying for a test or writing a paper or running sprints in practice is hard, imagine surviving the Holocaust or a burning ship in the attack on Pearl Harbor or a hurricane or a wildfire. Right? Like human beings are incredible survivors, and people are surviving in incredible ways every day. And I think it really puts a lot of first world problems into perspective. Like when I was working on Prisoner B3087 and I was reading every day about Jack Gruner and his Jack Gruner and his experience in the Holocaust, the prison camps he was put into, and everything he went through. I would get done at the end of the day, and then I would have my regular life. I wasn't Jack anymore, and I was out doing things, and I'd get stuck in traffic, and I'd be like, curse this traffic, and then I would remember, like, this is nothing. It's nothing, right? And it doesn't mean that our feelings about the bad things that happen to us don't matter. Like, it doesn't mean that stubbing your toe, you should be like, well, it's not as bad as being in a wildfire, and you just let it go. But it does put things into perspective. It helps you understand that this isn't the worst thing that could have happened to you. You will get through it, and that people have gotten through even worse things than that. I think it just speaks to the incredible way that humans have to survive. And so I hope that helps people be more resilient in their own lives. I hope that it's a lesson that says if this person could get through this, you can get through what you're doing, what's going on with you, because everything is, everything's relative. The problems that we have are huge problems for us because they're problems. But it does really, I think, put things in perspective. At least I hope it does. It does for me.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what I love so much about this conversation is so much about just reframing and viewing things in a different way, because it can be so easy to just get caught up in so much negativity, but realizing that there is a whole other way to look at it. And of course, a horrible situation is a horrible situation, but there are so many things that we can take from it and realize that there are also something good and positive that we can bring out of it.
Yeah, I don't think we have to say like every bad thing is like a learning experience, or try and find be a Pollyanna and try and find the good in everything. I still see things and I'm like, man, that stinks, and it really stinks, and there's no good part to it. But at the same time, I think it does help to think I can get through this. That I can get past this, and there's bigger things to get upset about than this.
Exactly. It's not to say that, stubbing your toe or being horribly stuck in traffic isn't, bad, but it's just a reminder of, what, I can get through this, because as a human, we're very resilient, even in times of like really big, like challenge and stress and chaos. And kind of shifting the conversation a little bit to your own journey as an author. I know at the beginning you said that, while you were a teacher and getting into writing, you faced a lot of rejection. So I'd love to kind of dive into that a little bit more, because I think we all face rejection, and many of us fear rejection. So tell us about your journey of writing and how you overcame those rejections, kept going.
Sure. I told you guys that I quit teaching to stay at home and be a stay-at-home dad and a writer, but that I'd wanted to be a writer for a long time. And so I'd been working on it for a long time. And I did get a lot of rejections. The first two books that I wrote before I was a stay-at-home dad and writer, I wrote in their entirety. One was a middle grade story about a group of teenage superheroes who have to save their city after all the adult superheroes are taken out by a supervillain. And another one was like a YA romantic comedy. And I wrote these and I sent them out, and I got tons of rejection letters for them. I think I got like 45 rejection letters for both books each, like 45 for each one. And neither of those has ever sold or been published. But I wrote one, started sending it out, and I would sit down and start writing the next one, right? Like it was important to me that I wanted this so badly. I wanted to be a writer so badly that I couldn't put all my eggs in one basket. I couldn't say, this is the only book I'm writing, and if it doesn't sell, I'm out, right? Like if you think like that, you're bound to fail, because what you've got to do is keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. I mean, persistence is the name of the game. And so for me, I wrote books, sent them out, got rejection letters. This was back in the days when you'd send them out by mail, like physical mail, and they would come back. Your letter would come back, whether it was if it was rejection, in your mailbox. And I remember one day going to the mailbox and getting two separate letters from two different publishers on the same book. And one of them said, "No thanks, we like your story but not your characters." And the other one said, "No thanks, we like your characters but not your story." And you begin to realize that when you are an artist, whatever you're creating, it's very subjective. somebody out there is going to love what you do and somebody out there is going to not love what you do. And you're looking for the people who love what you do and say, this is great, I want to do it. So it was always about persistence for me. I knew I wanted it. It was going to take time, and I was going to put the time in. If Samurai Shortstop hadn't sold, I already had an idea for the next book, and I was working on it. And that, in fact, became my next sold book once I had sold Samurai. But if Samurai hadn't sold, that would be the next book I would be taking out and trying to get published. So I threw a lot of things at the wall to see what would stick. And finally, when something stuck, I kind of just kept my foot in that door and kept trying to send more stuff out like that. So it was difficult, but I there's very few writers especially that I've run into who sold their very first book on their very first submission. In fact, I have a really good friend who was sending out her 10th book, and the other 9 had not been bought. Right, like all rejections, and she told herself, "This is it. Like I've tried it, and if on my 10th book nobody will buy this, then maybe the universe is telling me it's time to hang it up." Right? Because there's persistence and then there's being foolish. But she believed in herself, and she sold that book for a huge deal. Like got a big deal, and has now been a New York Times best-selling author. So, like. It just shows you that persistence can and often does pay off. Doesn't always, unfortunately. There's no guarantees in life, but you're certainly never you're really not going to get it if you try once and then you just give up.
And you know what's interesting about that is that idea of like, it's not just the time passing with persistence. It's the fact that you're getting better. You're getting better
That's
at
right.
your plot. You're getting better at your character development, at your stories and your writing. And so I think like for us, even with our podcast or with our business and our products, it's like, what can I learn from the last one, whether it was a success or not, and like apply to the next one, so that as you're perseverant, you're always like gaining something each time.
Yeah. Totally. I look back at those books that I sent out, and I can see why they didn't sell. The ones that got rejected. I know. I've reread them, and I'm like, oh, wow, there's a character here that shows up in the first half of the book, and then I just kind of forgot about him. And like the more I wrote, the better I got, the more I worked on my own organizing. Like the first book that I ever outlined in that way that I told you guys about was Samurai Shortstop. And it's not a coincidence to me that that was the first book that I sold. So like it took me a while to get to that point. And I think I run into a lot of young people who want to be writers. And it's so easy now to just go online and self-publish your stuff. You can put it on Wattpad. You could just put it online. You can go to someplace like Amazon and get an actual print copy. And that is awesome. But it kind of takes away the journey of getting better that you're talking about. Like sending stuff out and having somebody say, not yet, not yet, not yet, right? Like maybe you're great and you're good enough to when you first self-publish something, it's awesome and it's going to launch your career. But there's also something to be said for getting some rejection and having to overcome that and learning from that and it making you a better creator.
Absolutely. I feel like there's so many times where like you just want that like instant gratification where it's like, I want my first book to be my first seller and become a bestseller after this one. But it's so difficult if you don't have any like previous prior experience. This is your first book that you've ever written, and then you have that huge expectation that sometimes it becomes so hard to even finish the book because you have so much of that expectation on yourself that you can't even let yourself finish writing it. So
I think
totally
for the person listening, if they feel like stuck in this endless loop of they want to go after their goal and passion, but it's not turning out, they're not getting it, or they're not hitting that benchmark that they've claimed as success, like keep going, but also figure out like what you can learn from each setback or rejection, because and also don't fear the rejection, because that's the only way that you'll get closer to that mark.
It's not great. I mean, like rejection stinks. It really hurts to have somebody say you pour your heart and soul into something, and then to have somebody say no, and it really hurts. But there are good rejection letters, I tell people, and it's true. Somebody can say like, I love this part of the story. And that's a positive thing where they're saying like, don't change this. you got that down. Your dialogue's great. Don't change that, right? So you can sort of start through good criticism, learn what's working and what doesn't.
I love that so much. And that's definitely, it's very hard to take criticism, but it's definitely a learning process. And I want to talk about the fact that you host free monthly virtual school visits, which I think is so incredible.
I love that.
What questions do kids ask you that surprise you? And then what are some questions that you wish they would ask?
So I have free virtual school visits. I used to visit schools in person, and I would do like 100 schools a year. I was on the road all the time. Yeah, it was a lot. And I almost didn't have time to write my books. So finally the books were doing well enough to where I didn't have to be on the road all the time. I was at North Texas Teen Book Festival last weekend. I still do conferences and festivals and things like that, but I'm trying to do things that are very public where a lot of people can come rather than going to one school. So to keep up with the school visits, I decided I wanted to keep doing like virtual visits. And I was like, I don't want people to have to pay for these. Like I'll just do it, pick my time. And then if your school can make it, show up, and as many people can show up as they want. And it also records it. I don't do it on Riverside. I use Crowdcast is my tool I use for that. And it records it automatically. And so when I'm done, people can immediately go and watch it as a replay. So I have a lot of fun with that, and I do it once a month. You can always go to my website and look for my schedule if you're listening to this. The questions I get are a lot of fun because I do the first half of it as a presentation, and then the second half is all the Q&A, and kids can type in questions and I'll answer them live. I got to tell you guys, I'm not sure that there's a whole lot I haven't been asked after like 15 years of kid questions. Some of the most surprising things, I guess, are like, how much do you weigh? That's always a fun one to get. How old are you? Are you rich? These are questions that kids ask a lot. And it's always interesting. Or when are you going to write a book about this? Or when are you going to write a book about that? I get those a lot, that kind of thing. So I don't know if I've been surprised by a question in a long time. One of my favorite questions that I've started to get now that I never got at the beginning of my career was, what are the challenges that you've had to overcome to get where you are? And I think that comes from really interesting conversations that kids are having in the classroom with their teachers who are thinking, who are not just teaching the kids the content that they have to teach them in the textbook, but are also trying to teach them to be better people, right? To be people who can see that there are challenges to overcome and to know that that is part of the process of getting better. So that's probably one of the more interesting questions I've been asked of late. I don't know what else has been surprising. And I don't know if there is a question. Well, I guess if there's one question I wish that somebody had asked me that they hadn't already, it is, can my parent who works for Netflix make one of your books into a movie? That would be a great question to get. And I know what my answer would be. It would be yes.
Yes, I wish that I could ask that for you, but unfortunately not connected at Netflix.
Not yet. Someday.
Maybe someday, exactly.
Yeah. I'll get that question.
I love that. I love that they're so inquisitive, and the fact that you do so much for the schools and for students and for the next generation is so important. And yeah, I love that when the teachers are, to your point, trying to help the kids not just learn the facts in the curriculum, but actually really consider who they are and what it takes to get to where you want to be and who you want to be. And kind of as we wrap up, I've been wondering, and I really wanted to ask this as we were putting together our questions, if you could write a book taking place within any event that has happened in the past 10 years, which event would you choose to write about and why?
There have been a couple of things that have happened in the last 10 years that I immediately thought about trying to write a book about. The war in Ukraine was one, and in fact, I wrote up a story idea, just like a page-long synopsis, and of something that I read about in the war in Ukraine, and sent it to my editor. And she was like, "This is great, but we have a Canadian-Ukrainian author already who is working on a book about the Ukraine war." And she wasn't doing the exact story that I wanted to tell, but my publisher already had somebody who had like a connection to that country. And it was like, okay, cool. I totally get it. Like, it's hers. Let her have that. I'll find something else, right? But if nobody else was writing that book for Scholastic, I wanted to be the person to write that. The other thing that came up within the last 10 years that I really, really wanted to write a book was the January 6th Capitol invasion in the United States. And I was really shocked by that. I was really horrified by that. It felt like a really, really big moment that we kind of then just said, well, we're just going to move on, right? And I'm like, oh, wow, I don't think we should move on from this quite yet. Like, I think we need to talk about this. So I also wrote up another proposal where that would be part of the story, but then I would also show sort of the rise of white supremacists and extremists in the country in the past. And I turned that pitch in, and the publisher and I talked about it, and we were like, maybe not yet. Like, this isn't a no, but like, it's often really hard to write about something that just happened because you're kind of waiting to see how things shake out, and you'd like to have a little bit more distance and a little bit more perspective on something. And I mean, I turned that in like February of that year. Like, I was like hot to write that, so I totally get it, and I think that giving it a little bit of space is the right idea, and it may be something that I still come back to. But what I've learned is that what really works best in writing about difficult issues is to not write directly about the issue itself, but to write about something that happened in the past that is a parallel or a contrast to what you're writing about. And not every one of my books does this. But there are so many things in the past that we can pull out that have a connection to where we are and who we are today, that I can write about things in the 1936 Berlin Olympics that still connect to things that are happening today, to still connect to conversations and debates and things that we're trying to deal with today. And I found that that's the best way to come at a modern situation, is to tell a story of the past that then speaks to that moment. And I like to think that all of my historical fiction does that. I like to call my books social thrillers. I want them to be page turners, the thriller kind of aspect where you can't put it down, but all of them to have also a social justice angle to them, where there's some issue that's affecting us in the present that we're going to address through talking about the past. And that's what I did with Refugee. You know, one of the 3 stories in Refugee did take place in the present for when the book came out, but it was not about immigrants trying to get into the United States, right? It was about immigrants trying to get from Syria to Germany. The big debate in the moment when that book came out was, are we going to let more refugees into the United States? But I wasn't writing about that. I was writing about a time in the past when we didn't let refugees in, like in the 1930s. And I was, in the 1990s. And I was writing about the present day, some other country dealing with this. And I think that was a soft way of opening the door to that conversation in classrooms, where to talk about what was happening in the United States right that moment might have been too controversial for a lot of teachers. And so that's what I'm always hoping to do is, yes, there are things that happen like right now, and I'm like, oh man, I totally want to write a book about that this second. But it's usually better to give it a little bit of space, and then also to see if there's a way to write about what's happening in the present by talking about the past. One thing that I do want to write about is the progressive era, and it's harder than saying, like, I want to do a book about Pearl Harbor or D-Day, because those are big events and we kind of know what those were. But like in the progressive era, women got the right to vote, and we had labor unions begin, and we had people who were getting safe working conditions, and we were getting the Food and Drug Administration to make sure we weren't eating and drinking poison because somebody cooked up something weird and sold it as medicine. Like, we had all these things that were happening. Like, kids weren't allowed to work anymore, but they had been working in factories. Like, that changed. Like, all these things that we did to move forward and to make our society better. I would love to write about that. And one of the other things that was happening at that time was there were a very few very rich people who were kind of controlling everything because they were so rich. And I was like, that sounds familiar. Like a bunch of rich people who are who are making things happen because they're rich. And I thought, well, that's kind of happening still today. Maybe I could write that book and show what we did back then to help deal with that situation, like with antitrust laws and that kind of thing. and trying to get the bribery scandals and that sort of thing uncovered, and what's happening today, right? So that's always what I'm trying to do, is what's happening today and how can I find a story in the past that comments on it.
It's interesting how these kind of events can overlap, right? I think that's one of
Yeah.
the most interesting parts of it, is like this happening all these years ago can still come back and have some alignment with today's age. And so I think that's an interesting
And
way
have
to
like
look at it.
relevance and can
Yeah.
cause conversations that can really
Yeah.
cause change as well.
Totally.
Yeah, history repeats itself, and that it gets back to studying the past to know what to do with the present.
So now we have some quick rapid fire questions that we always like to go through.
All right.
For starters, what is a go-to weekday meal for you?
So pizza is my go-to weekday meal. Just plain cheese pizza. I'm very boring, but I have a very limited diet. I'm a really picky eater and have been since I was a kid. And pizza is so go-to for me that I once did the math, and I think I have in my life eaten about 30,000 pizzas. I eat pizza almost every day. I used to eat pizza every day. Now I've worked in a couple of other things to kind of add a little bit of variety, but I still eat pizza most at nights a week.
That's amazing.
Pizza-
That's
you
a
can't
lot of
go wrong.
pizza. I love pizza too.
Me too. I love it. That's a good
Yes.
choice.
And what is one piece of advice that you wish you could give to your teenage self?
You know, I think when I was in high school, I was very afraid of being a failure. I remember my high school, like in my yearbook, you could put a senior quote, under your picture. And my senior quote was from a movie called It's a Wonderful Life, and it was a line where the character says, "No man is a failure who has friends," right? And so I wrote that as my quote, "No man is a failure who has friends." And I look back at that now and I think, oh, well, it's a great sentiment, and it is. But I was so worried already as a high school senior that I was going to be a failure, that the potential that everybody had seen in me and told me about all my childhood, that I was going to grow up and not deliver. And I was already looking for not excuses, but like defenses. Like, I don't need to be successful. I've got a lot of friends, right? Like I was already looking at ways to defend my failure, and I hadn't even failed yet. I hadn't even tried anything yet. So like, I think I would go back and say, calm down. It's okay. You're not going to be a failure, number one. And the way to not be a failure is to not already assume that you're going to fail. It's to get up every morning and attack the day in a positive way. Attack what you want to accomplish in a positive way, and go for it. Don't let your own fear of failure hold you back. And I didn't. But it took me. It still was a struggle to overcome that, and I would love to go back to my younger self and say, you really don't have to stress out over this. Like, just get on with it.
I love that. Definitely very important to keep in mind.
It's so important because so many of us, there's this great saying that I say a lot, but don't be the one to tell yourself no.
Yes.
Because so many of us
Absolutely
walk in on ourselves and say, and that's why I think, like, going back to the beginning of this conversation, like your wife encouraging you to go all in on your writing, right? Having someone else there to push us through our own restrictions, because often we limit ourselves so much. And so I agree. It's so important to not zoom out for a second and say, wait, I'm not a failure. Because, what have I failed at? I can't just put that title on myself.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
And what do you do every day, Alan, that brings you a small bit of happiness?
Oh, man. I love to read. I try to read as much as I can. I love to play video games. I do that a lot. I hang out with my daughter a lot. I told you she's 23, and she lives in the same building that I do. Not in my house, but in the same building. And so she comes up at night, and we watch TV or we play video games or something together. That's a ton of fun. Those things, though, I don't do every one of those things every day. And so I don't know that I have one thing that I do, like one single thing that I do every day that brings me joy. And when you ask that, it makes me think, oh, what, like I should have something. Like I should find something and make sure that I do it every day. I've struggled with depression in my life, and it's there are days when you get really down and it's very hard to find the good. It's very hard to find the pleasure, the fun in life in those days. It would be helpful to have something. Do you guys have? What do you do every day.
I think for us, like what we always try to tell people that we talk to with on our podcast is like it can be something small. Like for me, even like my morning coffee with cinnamon on it. Like
Nice.
I love that.
Yeah.
Or like
I love whenever we're driving to school, just seeing the moon every morning. I find that brings me so much happiness. I'm not really
Or,
quite
like,
sure why, but
I love our family dinners. I love our dinners.
I know for me, I've definitely found that, you know, meditation and just finding some peace during those like turbulent and hard times can be really, really helpful. And the tool that's really helped me the most for that has been Waking Up. They have so many incredible meditations, and they also talk about the value and the power behind meditation. I know that it's been my personal favorite tool to help whenever I'm going through a little bit of a difficult journey.
Even on a tough day, it's just such a nice little reset to take. And if you want to give it a go, because truly it is the most transformational app we've installed recently, you can sign up for Waking Up and get 30 days free so you can try it out, give it a go, and see where it fits into your daily routine, because truly it's a must-have by using the link in our show notes.
Yeah, those are all good. I'll look for something like that. I like that.
It's just a small little thing.
Yeah, for me also, when it gets warm out, I always get really excited whenever I see like a butterfly anywhere. So just having like small things.
We live
that
in Canada,
are
so it's
exciting.
like snow most of
Yeah.
the time.
Well, and I live in Portland, Oregon, and we have over the winter the crows come and nest in the city, and I mean tons of crows, like hundreds and hundreds of crows, and they'll fly over the city in these massive flocks, and that does bring me a lot of pleasure. We call it the crow hour, and it's about the time of night where they're all looking for a place to settle in, and we'll go to our windows and kind of watch the big swirls of crows trying to find a place to settle in. I really do enjoy that. They're not they split up and they go their own separate ways in the summer, but like you with the seasonal stuff, Anastasia, I like the crows. I like the crows in the winter.
So cool. That's so interesting. And finally, as a final question, do you have a quote or like a motivational motto that you love and remember? And if you do, why?
So I guess I do. It's kind of a funny one, but it also is meaningful. So I got to go back to Yoda, and I'll say, do or do not. There is no try. So when I was a kid, I loved Star Wars. The first movie came out when I was 5, and I saw it in the theater tons of times. And so when Empire came out, was it 80? I would have been like 8 years old. And man, it was huge for me. That is one of my favorite movies of all time. And Yoda was so awesome and so wise. And in some ways, I think Luke resonated with me more than any of the other characters, because he also was worried about like not being able to live up to his potential, right? Like that was already something I was starting to feel as a kid. And so I've always identified with him. And, you know, he's kind of whiny and he's like, oh, I can't do it. I can't lift the X-Wing out of the swamp. And Yoda's like, dude, you do it or you don't do it, you know, do or do not. There is no try. And I it's kind of a joke, but I kind of have always thought of that as a mantra for myself. Do it or don't do it. But if you know, there's no just trying. You got to just go for it. So, you know, I don't consider all the books that I wrote that weren't published trying. I did it. Like I wrote those. So I needed somebody else to say yes to publish it, but that didn't change the fact that I wrote them. Right. I have a really good friend, Toby Buckell, who writes science fiction and fantasy for adults, and he doesn't celebrate selling a book or a short story. He celebrates sending out the short stories and the books to see if they'll get published. Like he has a thing where every 100 stories that he submits, he gets himself like a new video game or something, right? And he's not, and he may sell some of those. He may sell none of them. But the fact is, he did the part that he has control over. And so I try to think of it the same way. Like of the things that I have control over, how do I celebrate those accomplishments without attaching my success to somebody else's approval or disapproval?
I love that so much. That's such a great mindset to have.
Yes, I think we all could benefit from some of that type of wisdom. Absolutely. And Alan, where can our listeners find you if they want to follow you or keep up and learn more about you?
So I kind of backed away from social media a lot. You can probably find me still on Facebook and Instagram, but I don't update that much. The best place to go is my website. It is www.alangratz.com, and it's ALANGRATZ.com. And I have a newsletter that I send out once a month, and I have like historical tidbits and stuff about what I'm writing, and book giveaways and book recommendations. So I'm trying to send a lot of my energy there into the newsletter. So if you want to know more about me and my book, sign up for my newsletter.
Perfect. We'll make sure that that's linked in our show notes as well. And just thank you so much. We've learned so much, and this was such an awesome conversation for us as big fans of your writing. So thank you for your time and for everything today.
I appreciate you guys. Great questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Hack Your Happiness.
If you enjoyed this episode, we think you would love our conversation with historian and best-selling author Michael Scott. Michael takes us back to the classical ages of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and we talk all about the ultimate question: were people back then really happier than we are now? Life hacks from the ancient civilizations, and how ancient Greeks and Romans dealt with questions that we deal with today too, like purpose or identity. You can listen to our conversation with Michael Scott now. It's linked in our show notes. See you next time.